everybody. Thanks for coming today. My name is Rachel. I'm Congressman Grothman's Chief of Staff. We're really glad to be here and we're glad to see all of you. Wanted to run through with you real quick how we run our town halls. So Congressman Grothman will give you an update on what's going on in Congress and the things that he's been working on. After that, we'll take your questions. The way we do questions is you filled out a piece of paper when you came in with a question or a topic. Those go in a bucket, and then I randomly select them out, and you ask your question, and Congressman Grothman will respond. Just a reminder to everyone, when we're asking questions and when the congressman's answering them, be sure not to clap or talk over anyone so that everyone can hear, since we don't have a microphone in here. And with that, I will ask everyone to stand up and we'll say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and here's Congressman Grothman.
Well, thank you for all being here. I'm sometimes told I have a low voice and you can't hear. So if I naturally revert to talking low and you can't hear me, don't be afraid to raise your hand at that and say, speak up. We have with us today Dewey Strobel, who's the state senator for the area. So I may call upon him to ask me any questions which are more state related. Like Rachel said, the first thing I'll do is I'll go over some things that are going on in Washington, maybe give you a little bit of information that you didn't see in the paper, a different spin on things, and then we'll open it up for questions and hopefully get through everything everyone has to say. The first thing I'll talk about that's going on in Washington, you heard last Thursday night we passed an omnibus bill. An omnibus bill in Washington is kind of the equivalent of a state budget. It includes all of what I'll call the discretionary spending for the federal government. And the first thing you can see that was wrong with the bill is discretionary spending for the federal government from last October 1st till next September 30th. So it's a little bit odd that we passed this bill when we're about 6 months into the year already, but that's what they did. The other thing about the bill that's a little bit odd is that it's a bill of over 2,000 pages. The bill was not available to the public or us until about 21 hours before we voted on it. And even when the bill is available, that bill is in legalese, okay? Like it makes reference to statute, 257, parent H, parent 23, and whatnot. So even looking at the bill, you can't tell exactly what's in it. You're kind of hostage to summaries provided by our leadership team. So right off the bat, you see two big problems: waiting halfway through the year to pass it, and secondly, not really giving the congressman the time to know what they're voting on. But the biggest problem for me in the bill was the overall level of spending. What happened in that bill is people held out for a large amount, or digress. You can understand one of the reasons for the big reasons in spending. Sometimes people talk about how we want a lot more bipartisanship in Congress, and I have no problem working with Democrats. I've worked with Democrats a lot in the past. But due to the rules in the Senate on a spending bill, it requires 60 out of 100 votes, which means it will take, even if all 51 Republicans voted for it, which they wouldn't, at least 9 Democrats to vote for it. So the bill is a product of a compromise between Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell in the Senate, because immediately a lot of Republicans will not vote for it in the House. As a practical matter, it means both Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi have to sign off as well. So even once you resolve yourself to that, I think the bill spent far too much money, given that we're $21 trillion in debt. There were, to a certain extent, General Mattis weighed in, but more, there were a strong number of Republican armed services people who wanted a 10.5% increase in military spending. I think it's important we have a strong military. I think there are areas in which the military is wasting money. I think they're top-heavy, too many generals and admirals. I think they have probably too many civilian employees. I think there are some military projects in which they may be buying new equipment a little bit more for a congressman's district than the military needs it. Nevertheless, if you talk to people in the military, it is also unquestionably true that there are things we're not getting done and we should get done. So I think some increase in military spending was in order. I think 10.5% increase when you're already 6 months into the year is a little bit excessively high. The way things work in Washington, the Democrats will say, well, that's okay. We'll be happy to vote for a 10.5% increase in military spending if we get a substantial increase in non-military spending as well. And I think that it would have been good if Donald Trump would have campaigned or taken that to the public and said we don't want that much of an increase in non-military spending. Donald Trump's first budget provided for a 5.5% increase in military spending and a 6.5 or 7% cut in non-military spending. Nevertheless, they didn't take it to the public. They agreed to this deal, and as the result, you had a substantial increase in non-military spending as well. You finished the biennium up with over a 10% increase in overall discretionary spending at a time in which we're $21 trillion in debt. That's really, to me, totally unacceptable. I think also the threat of a shutdown, because the government is shut down if Donald Trump didn't sign something by Friday night, caused there to be some policy items in that budget that I don't know if I would have wanted in there. And as the result, I did not vote for it. I realized I couldn't get my perfect budget. I realized we were going to have to negotiate and give the Democrats some things that they wanted, but an overall increase like this was just unacceptable. And the overall increase in discretionary spending, which is about 30% of our total budget, was the highest increase we've had since George Bush's last year of the stimulus package. So we haven't gone up this much in 8 or 9 years, and I don't think that was the reason people voted Republican last November. So that's kind of what's going on there. I think the only good thing is I did call Donald Trump asking him to veto it. I think they felt they were in a little bit of a box. Given that they would have had to shut down the government, they would have to bring congressmen back, some of the congressmen go on trips abroad. But I think it will make him a better president in the future because he's been publicly critical of the deal, so he's not going to sign something like this again, so maybe it sets us up for better things there. I also was hoping they could do welfare reform this year, and I think the fact that Donald Trump, while he signed it, is considering this a little bit of a defeat, will maybe make him more aggressive in doing better things the next 6 months. As a matter of fact, the reason I'm a little bit late is I did complain and say I wanted it vetoed, and they got back to me now, kind of late because he signed the bill. But I was able to weigh in, and at least they understand where I'm coming from, and I think they feel the same thing. As far as other things that are going on, probably the highlight of this biennium was the tax cut. The major goal of the tax cut was to improve the economy. The United States had a 35% corporate rate. It was uncompetitive with the rest of the industrialized world. There's no doubt in my mind that we were losing industry, losing jobs to other areas around the world because of our high corporate rate. We lowered that to 21%, which is a step in the right direction. I think that also caused the stock market to go up, which is one way in which almost immediately we're going to get more income tax revenue coming in. And of course, that's a big step towards balancing the budget. Not only do we have to spend less money, but we have to grow the economy. Another problem with the old income tax code is that in the past, if you made money abroad, made money in Ireland, made money in Asia, and brought the money back after they taxed the money that that corporation made in Ireland, they taxed it again when it was brought back to the United States and put an addition on you. Obviously, that's another thing that would stifle the American economy. So it was another thing that is a benefit of the tax code. We also addressed individual taxes, and my goal there was to make sure that the average guy was treated well. The first Republican plan that we worked off of, I think, was more aimed at the investor class and the working class. One thing I didn't like about it is they had a special low income tax rate for interest income that was half the rate of what working people paid. I don't understand how you can say that if you're working for a living, you pay taxes twice what somebody maybe inherits money on, and it's just collecting interest income. So we got rid of that provision. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a situation in which somebody is making less than $100,000, which is a big amount of income, and is not getting a tax cut under this law. One area that I weighed on in particular, and I used to do income taxes in my prior life, was the medical deduction. For a while it looked like the medical deduction was going to be removed from the tax code, and some of the Republicans wanted to get rid of it because it simplified the return. But because I used to do income taxes, I visualized the type of people who used to get the medical deduction. And they're the people in the toughest position in life, people in a nursing home, today, people with big health insurance premiums, people with big deductibles, those sort of people who are most desperate, need income most, who need the income most themselves. In particular, I thought about people who are going through their 401k, you know, paying these big taxes, and then you have a big medical deduction. If you can't take that, it's really a double whammy. So I felt once I got through with it and weighed in, it was a much better tax law all the way around. I was much more satisfied with it and was glad to vote for it. The few people who are getting tax increases are largely people from high tax states, places like California, New Jersey, New York. I think every Republican who voted against the tax cut were from those states. And the reason they voted against it is because we capped the amount of state and local income taxes that are deductible, as well as capped the mortgage interest deduction for mortgages over $750,000. And while I assume that size of mortgage is relatively rare, probably non-existent in this room, apparently it's not at all rare in California, New York, or New Jersey, particularly among the contributor class. And that's why I think the only Republicans who voted against it were people who are voting against it because of high-income people in those states. I'll talk a little bit about other things that are going on. Obviously, the school shootings are still something that people are focusing on. And I have two bills out there. One of them will be combined with a larger bill, and another bill that I'm not as optimistic will pass. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to give local units of government more flexibility, the funds that are coming in from the federal government, to spend them on school safety. Be that more people within the schools, or more likely to me, more metal detectors, that sort of thing to protect our schools. It has obviously become something, a major concern, and insofar as the local districts are getting money, it's good if they're able to use them for that. One other issue that I don't think has been as publicized as it should be, as far as what was going on in Florida, is the local law enforcement and the local school district down there had a policy of not charging young people who had committed serious crimes with crimes. What's Cruz's first name? The guy who... Nicholas, that's it. Nicholas Cruz had well over 30 contacts with the police. He had clearly committed things that were crimes, things he should have been charged with. They had this policy in Broward County that eventually the Obama Department of Education tried to push other districts into, in which they would not charge young people with crimes. The idea being that if you charge somebody with a crime and got a criminal mark on their record, it would be harder for them to get a job in the first place. Of course, when we put together our criminal justice system, we have to realize that one of the reasons we charge people with crimes is we want to take them off the street, and the second thing is we want to send them down a path in which they realize they did something wrong so they don't commit so many crimes in the future. If they would have charged Nicholas Cruz with some of the crimes that he committed, first of all, it would have been against the law for him to purchase some of these weapons. And secondly, more importantly, he might have even been in prison. But not long before this shooting took place, they were bragging in Broward County of about a 75% reduction in the number of crimes that young people down there have been charged with. There weren't less crimes, they just weren't charging people after they committed the crimes. My bill will say that in the future, the Secretary of Education can, first of all, it should be a local control thing anyway, but the Secretary of Education in the future cannot be setting standards or encouraging local districts not to charge young people with crimes. And hopefully the bill will pass. Even if it doesn't pass, hopefully it will alert the public that there are local schools that will, or local governments, that feel that the major problem is not crime, the major problem is people are sitting in prison for crimes, and therefore not charging people with crimes. I would hope, or I would assume, that here in Sheboygan County, you would never elect a district attorney who would promise to say, I will not charge 75% of the crimes that are committed. But there are some big government, or major cities around the country in which that's kind of the popular thing to do. And I don't think it was predictable that if they didn't charge as a crime, the guy with a crime, he would kill so many people. But I think it was entirely predictable if they didn't charge him with a crime, he would go on committing lesser crimes, and it's not surprising at all he wanted killing at least some person. So that's in general how I am approaching, that's the tact I am taking, as one of 435 congressmen, as far as how Congress can respond to what happened in Florida. As far as other things that are going on, I am on the Education and Workforce Committee. Our major focus there is twofold. First of all, insofar as the federal government can weigh in for more skills-based education. Whether you tour the factories around here, whether you talk to the people in construction or the trades, you will find there is a shortage of people with the skills necessary to produce things and construction in the area. There's no question that we have too many people graduating from four-year colleges with kind of degrees that don't necessarily lead to jobs. It's tragic in its own right, but it's particularly tragic that so many people are graduating with college with degrees and have student loans to boot. A little while ago at one of these meetings, I ran into a couple. Between them, they had $100,000 in student loans, and neither one is getting a job in the area in which they went to school. One of the things we're going to look to do is we're going to put some sanctions on educational institutions if too many of the people who go to those educational institutions wind up not being able to pay their student loans. What do you guys do in the water?
You bottle the water straight to the water.
To my left, they thought.
There's one on both sides.
Hopefully that will go through. We passed that bill out of committee in the House. We have not put it to the floor yet, but hopefully we'll be able to move that through there. And that will be a step in the right direction, both as far as getting more people out towards the jobs that have to be filled in society, and hopefully creating less kids out there with student loans in the future. As far as other things that are going on, in a bill that I voted for earlier, we are doing a variety of things at the federal level to address the opioid crisis. We did put more money into border security, particularly looking for the fentanyl drugs that are coming in from China, which is such a horrific situation. As you know, opioids right now are causing more deaths in some years than both car accidents and homicides combined. So, well, I'm not thrilled with, well, it is something that there is demand for the federal government to do something with. We're also having increased grants to local law enforcement as far as getting more involved in trying to catch some of these criminals. I have met with people in the federal government. We're trying to get somebody to come through here and have a meeting, perhaps in Oshkosh, perhaps in Fond du Lac, dealing with the heroin crisis. We've had some turnover in Washington. We were going to have a meeting in May. I still would like to have something around that time. We're trying to put something together. So that's what's going on there. And that's kind of an overview as far as what's going on. Oh, on the trade stuff, this is a big manufacturing area. There is more manufacturing in Wisconsin 6th Congressional District, and there's more manufacturing jobs in Wisconsin 6th Congressional District than anywhere else in the country. So you're aware, we always kind of think of Wisconsin as being the dairy state. The state with the highest percentage of manufacturing jobs in the country is Indiana. Wisconsin is right below that. Then there's a further drop before you get to Michigan. So that's our situation. Because so many of our jobs involve metal, it is potentially dangerous to the state of Wisconsin. We put tariffs on steel and aluminum. I have weighed in with the Trump administration there. I think the Trump administration was viewing most exceptions to their tariffs as being by country. I think it's more important those exceptions being by the type of metal you have, because there are different types of metal. For example, there's canning in the area. The United States right now does not have the capacity I believe, to produce enough of the type of metal you need for canning, and quite frankly, the quality of that metal in the United States is not up to snuff. If we're going to continue to be competitive in the canning industry, we have to be able to import some of that metal from abroad, and I'm working with the Trump administration to make exceptions on that sort of thing. There are other examples of different types of metals we do not make here as well. There is one factory in this district, I won't say which one, that is threatened to shut down if this thing goes ahead as initially planned. We also have to look out with regard to a trade war as what effect it will have on agriculture in this state. Be it dairy, be it corn, it's potentially a problem. We have heard already that Mexico, kind of because of threats, is already perhaps buying more corn from South America. And overall, hopefully what Donald Trump is doing is right. He is negotiating, he is, setting out negotiating positions that other countries may back off on. There are certainly many examples of unfair trade going on, and I'm supportive of Donald Trump insofar as he tries to deal with that. So, there's a little bit of an overview of what's going on. We have enough people here that hopefully we'll be able to fill up the next half hour. Rachel, what do we have?
All right, James Piper.
In the lavender bucket.
James Piper?
Okay.
Yes.
You already answered that. My question was on the budget. What did you think about the budget?
Right, I voted against it, and there are many, many things wrong with it, but the biggest is just overall the level of spending. People did not vote for Republicans to increase spending.
Laurel Lawrence?
Yes,
You touched briefly about education.
correct.
I guess for the future, I have 2 children that are right now in college. I have one that is just graduated recently. I guess, bills for them are evident, it's going to be evident they're going to have to, and I'm just wondering, what is the forecast for students? You touched on it briefly about their debt that's up and coming, but jobs.
Where are your kids going to school?
One is Platteville, one is Oshkosh.
Okay, well, that's good, not too far away. I think the important thing is you have to make sure your kids are on the path to get a job, right? Look for internships, make sure they're getting a major in a field that, I assume Platteville is good for that. Do you know what your kids are majoring in yet?
Mechanical engineering.
That's right, you got it down. Major in political science, good for you. Good, that's right. And the important thing is to get majors in things that are nursing, engineering, that sort of thing. And if they're getting majors there, I think things will be okay. I'm glad to see they're staying in state, reasonable tuition, they should be in good shape. And they've done a good job, Dewey, the state legislature has done a good job of keeping tuition, I think even since Scott Walker took office, something he doesn't talk about a lot, but they've had a tuition freeze now for like 6 years on the UW system, which by the standards of other states, I think they're doing a really good job.
David Clark?
You answered a little bit about the tariffs, but also I was interested in a comment on globalism versus nationalism.
Well, I think globalism is a problem. It's a problem in Europe as well, because insofar as you join big multinational organizations, you lose control of your government, right? That's what's going on in Europe. They go to vote for whoever's going to be in Parliament in England or France or whatever, and they are trumped by a bunch of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. And whenever you are part of a multinational organization, you are given up authority. Even on a federal level, it is much more difficult to get a handle on your government than on a state level. When I was a state legislator, I knew the people who ran the DNR, ran the Department of Transportation. I knew their legislative people. Much more difficult to deal with a federal agency. Can you imagine if you're dealing with an agency based in Paris or something? I mean, you have to keep that sort of thing at a minimum. That's why I don't like it. Right.
Bonnie Clark?
Put us together. It was about the omnibus. I just don't like the whole way it's done. And you talked about that, and I don't know if there's any way to change the system so you can
Well,
get more knowledge.
I think we have to be, I mean, I complain to my leadership, but I think people have to be a little bit louder. And I think voices in the media have to be a little bit louder. I mean, right now, we are beginning to work on the budget for the fiscal year that begins October 1st. Now, they rarely, I honestly don't know the last time they got it done by September 30th. But obviously, this was uniquely horrible, not to pass a budget until you're halfway through the year the budget is for. That's kind of completely out of line. So I think insofar as we apply public pressure, that will be better. And as far as not being able to look at a bill until 21 hours before you vote on it, a bill that's hundreds and hundreds of pages long, I know almost no state legislature, not just Wisconsin, but others, would not put up with it. And again, I'll emphasize, even seeing the bill isn't enough, because the bill is in legalese. On a state level, you get people called the fiscal bureau who at least put together in layman's language what you're voting on. All we had was bullet points put together by the negotiators of the bill, who of course put the best spin on it. So it's something I'm trying to encourage people to do something about in Washington. Part of the problem is a lot of the people in Washington were never a legislator anywhere else, so they don't realize that this is completely ridiculous. Maybe they think it's just like any new job, this is the way it happens, this is the way it happens. But I will object more firmly in the future about not having an analysis of every bill before we go forward.
Tom Gordon?
Yes, sir. Well, my question was kind of like specifics on budgets, but let me say I'm glad you voted no. I'm happy to see that, because there was a lot of stuff in there that I personally don't think the federal government should be voting for. And I mentioned Planned Parenthood, sanctuary cities, but so let's change it and just ask you what your overall opinion is about this whole sanctuary city, sanctuary state stuff.
So those of you who know, sanctuary cities are cities where a city, or in some cases a whole state, says that they will pride themselves on not enforcing immigration laws. They've been publicized and not publicized enough, because a country cannot exist if their immigration laws are widely ignored. And you can't expect people to obey the immigration laws if elected officials, like in California, the entire state is basically saying, come here. In California, we don't care if you're breaking your immigration laws. I sat next to somebody last week at a dinner from Oregon, and assuming what he's told me is right, Oregon is just filling up with people here illegally without jobs. And it's making a formerly beautiful city somewhat of a mess. But it's not surprising people are moving there if they basically advertise that we're not going to do anything about it. I wish we would withhold federal funds. There's some question whether Jeff Sessions can do that on his own. I wish he would. Obviously, I've co-sponsored bills and voted for bills with regard to sanctuary cities. And again, we will lose our country if we don't get a handle on these immigration laws, right? Everybody in this country should be productive, and everybody in this country should want to buy into the idea that they are American. They shouldn't be hostile to the country. And we're getting both of these types of people to come in here. I mean, they make a big deal. People are working on the farms, they're hardworking and being an asset. And there's some of that too. But every immigrant should be a good immigrant, and I don't know what the numbers of bad immigrants are, but if, let's say we're getting 7 good and 3 bad, that's enough to destroy America, right? And it is scary that so many, it is scary that so many elected officials in this country can get away with saying we are going to encourage people to break the immigration laws. Isn't that scary? I sometimes think the bigger problem we have is the attitude of Americans. How do these elected officials get elected in California, which after all is the most populated state in the country? So apparently the average person out there, I don't know what they think. They think they're being cool or whatever, to go along with that sort of thing. Same type of thing said by the mayor of New York. You could say it's New York, but it's part of the United States, and as people flood into these areas, ultimately they'll flood over the rest of the United States as well.
Shelley, oops, sorry.
In any event, whatever we can do to stop the sanctuary cities is for the better, and I do all I can to encourage Donald Trump in that regard.
Shelley Mulligan?
That's me.
Oh, sorry.
My question is about the dairy industry. We're currently dairy farmers, and we are in some very depressed prices. What are your thoughts on that and the federal order pricing system that is affecting us?
Well, obviously the problem with dairy is there's overproduction, right? There are two things. Probably they're throwing away some milk, right? As I understand in Pennsylvania and such, which means they've got a lot of milk. And it would be good if we could find more markets abroad. Okay, Donald Trump has talked about the value of the dollar falling. If the value of the dollar falls, presumably that'll be good for the dairy industry. We do not want to wind up in a trade war, because a trade war could hurt not only dairy but agriculture in general. We have a lot of corn farming around here. Corn prices are also low, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess those are the things that I look at as far as what's going to be in the new ag bill. I believe it has been referred to us, and I'm not on the agriculture committee. I'd be happy to weigh in and get your input later on. But I do not believe right now the agriculture bill is going to pass this year. I think they're going to do some continuing things. We are told, and I get along with all people, we are told the Democrats feel they're going to do well in this election. They would rather not pass a bill until after November. That's what we've been told.
Paul Wagner?
Yeah, that's me. My question was, what you started out with is explaining the budget that was just passed. And I'm just concerned about some of the stuff I heard on TV about what's in that budget and all the stuff that is not as fact, and the way it was presented. I mean, I saw the stack of paper, and there's no way you guys could look at this thing and legitimately weigh on it.
I'll explain
and
something else.
And everybody voted for it,
I'll explain something else about why Washington is screwed up. In any normal elected body, the Waldo Village Board, a majority rules. In the U.S. Senate, on these big spending bills, it takes 60 votes. So right away, it has to be bipartisan. And as soon as it becomes bipartisan, you have to make a wider variety of people happy. Rather than saying nobody gets all we want in spending, it is apparent they passed the bill by giving everybody more and more and more. That's a problem. Another problem is, as in any negotiation from a Republican perspective, if you did not settle things, ultimately the government would shut down. Okay? You'd say, what if you don't give in? What happens? Well, on Friday the government would have shut down. There were a growing number of congressmen who would not have voted to continue funding at last year's level for another month or 2 months. I would have been happy to do that, but some people wouldn't have. I think Republican leadership, felt that if there was a government shutdown, the public would blame Republicans because they're in charge. So I think that made some Republican negotiators feel they had to get the deal done no matter what. And of course, in any negotiation, if you feel you have to get it done no matter what, it puts you at a disadvantage, right? And I've sat in meetings in which Republican leadership feels, maybe rightfully, that a government shutdown would hurt Republicans a lot in the future. And the degree to which that affected how they negotiate, I'm not sure. But common sense would tell you it probably did.
Mary Meyer? Ray Zimmerman?
Yes.
lot of issues, but the one that just came to mind when they asked me to write it down was about a month and a half, 2 months ago, there was a special on TV, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, it had to do with how much time representatives have to spend fundraising.
I think that was a couple of years ago, and I can be very critical of Congress, as you can tell. But the story on 60 Minutes was a bunch of lies. It was 2 years ago, and what happened was, there was a Republican congressman who decided he was running for U.S. Senate at the time in Florida. And he decided he would become famous by getting on 60 Minutes and claiming that we were spending something like 30 hours a week fundraising in Washington, or some exorbitant amount, 20 minutes, or 20 hours, 25 hours. I was a little bit afraid, because I thought maybe I'm out of step. Maybe I should be spending a lot more time, because I wasn't doing that. So I talked to a lot of my colleagues, and I could find nobody who was fundraising more than 3 or 4 hours a week. The congressman who was on 60 Minutes was not considered, people didn't have a high opinion of him before this. He was a lobbyist before he got the job and was not that well respected as a lobbyist. And what he did is he walked into the Republican Party and took pictures of where people were phone calling, which he shouldn't have done either. But he was just lying to make himself famous. I asked many of my colleagues to see if I was out of step. I couldn't find anybody phone calling for more than, say, 5 hours a week, and most people was 2 or 3 hours. So that's the real norm.
Russ Otten?
All my questions. Thank you.
Carol Zoran?
Yes, I had asked about the trade and all of that, but one thing I can't understand is that we are getting a huge deficit, but it's not only spending, because you have to spend for things you need. When I was a single parent, if I didn't get my child support check, something had to be cut, because we still had necessary expenses. I had to feed my children, I had to keep a roof over their head, but we had these massive tax cuts, most of which went to the wealthy people. The corporations are going to keep them in perpetuity, and yet the rest of us are going to lose our tax cuts in what is it, 6 years?
Well,
but this doesn't balance. How can you take all the money out of the system and yet you're spending more money in the system and you're not going to run a deficit? Why doesn't the Congress grow a few balls and start standing up to this president and some of his screwball ideas that he's got, like this trade war now that we're thinking are going to be?
I told you that while I'm hopeful that Donald Trump is able to negotiate a better deal with the Chinese, say, or a better deal with the Canadians, I have disagreed with them as well. And I've called them on, how some of these steel tariffs are going to work out. So, I'm not afraid to disagree with Donald Trump. As far as the taxes are concerned, if you want to have a growing American economy that we used to have in this country year after year after year, you cannot be uncompetitive tax-wise with the other countries. I mean,
we also had a fairer tax system where the wealthy people were paying more of the taxes than they are right now.
The wealthy people, under this bill, the number of people paying no taxes at all, and by the way, I'm not sure it's good to have a lot of people paying no taxes at all, but the number of people paying no tax at all is going up, okay? And it's surprising how much money you can make and not even pay any tax at all. I think there was a time in this country where the wealthiest people, I think well into the 1950s, I think well into the early 1960s, I believe, in which the wealthiest people were paying 90% tax. And you can say that's fair. What happens when you put a 90% tax on something? Nobody declares any income. Why would you work or declare income if the government's going to take 90%? So I think eventually they realized at the time, John Kennedy was the one who began to cut the taxes. They realized that not only is that just unfair on its face that you tax 90%, but you end up not getting anything. Because people change their behavior because you don't want any income to declare if the government's going to take that amount.
Kathy Follweifel? Diane Gordon?
You have a question?
I'll ask one for her. Because she didn't vote down.
She yields.
I yield to my husband.
And if you don't mind, maybe we'll ask
Yeah.
both of you, especially Representative Strobel, what's going on with Highway 23? Anything good to report?
Well, of course, it's been tied up in the courts. We've had a very activist environmental group that's been derailing that thing left and right, and they've been very well funded. But where it stands right now is there's a refinement of the report that was used in order to justify the building of the expansion of Highway 23, and the judge, Edelman, had some issues with that and wanted it updated. So right now that is in the process of being updated right now, and I know the Department of Transportation feels very comfortable that once that information is updated and provided, that Highway 23 should be able to proceed. The money is there for Highway 23. It is sitting there waiting to be spent for that road to be enhanced and improved. It's working through this judicial process that we're stuck in right now, but it appears as though there's light at the end of the tunnel on where that stands right now.
The last time I talked to the Department of Transportation, they were talking about trying to get something going by the end of the year.
Brandon Weaverding?
I don't have a question.
Okay. Lee Hoffmeister?
Close enough, thank you.
Sorry.
Hi, and thank you for holding this meeting when I discussed things before. And I really appreciate the fact that you're addressing some of the safety issues.
Right.
My concern is that gun violence in our country has reached such an escalated level. We do something different administratively to take guns off the streets. I know our law enforcement works as hard as they can to try to keep everyone safe, but it's not working. And so I would ask that you go to the table, talk with other people on the other side of the gun control issue than perhaps you feel, and come up with solutions that could work. I would ask that you consider universal background check, consider a 3-day waiting period for all purchases of firearms, reinstate the assault weapons ban bump stocks, and help enhance treatment of mentally ill people, because we need to do something. The escalation has gone from streets into houses of worship, into our schools. Luckily, the students are speaking up now, and there's great momentum to ask that we save lives. No matter what your beliefs are, save lives. And so I just ask that you consider that, talk to other people about it, and thank you. Thank you for your work.
Well, thanks for being here, and I'm sure that the bill's introduced in Congress. I will point out that until a couple of years ago, I think it was either 2014 or 2015, the murder rate in this country was falling pretty much straight down since around the early 1980s. I think to quote your number and get it wrong, but if you Google the number of murders in this country in 1980 and Google the number of murders in 2014, there was a big drop, and that's despite the fact that the population grew. It's come back the last couple of years, and one can speculate as to why that is. I know that mirrors what happened in the city of Milwaukee. Right, Milwaukee was a lot lower, and all of a sudden, 15, 16, and 17, it was much higher. And I think a lot of that was due to a change in the way policing was done. I think for whatever reason, in 16 and 17, a lot of the urban police forces were less aggressive. That is why there was a huge spike in the number of murders in Chicago. And I think the new Chicago police chief has tried to kind of address the fact that after some of the incidents that happened maybe in Missouri, there was a lot less aggressive policing, and that's why what happened in Chicago happened there, and I think the same thing kind of happened in Milwaukee. But we will be looking at our gun laws, and when I get back, like I said, I'll make sure we talk to people on the other side of the aisle too, and I've got some of my staff here today to remind me to do it, so thanks for bringing up your issue.
Gary Decker.
And I guess, if the company had to have their workers build something 4 times, 3 times, how long do you think the workers would stay there and not be fired? And just putting a Band-Aid on the budget and everything else just requires you to take more of your time and effort to do the same thing over and over again without getting the job done. It's hard for everybody down there to, maybe she said it right, grow a pair of balls. And do the job that they're supposed to do and get it done. Not worry about going home to campaign or raise funds or go on a vacation or if they're out of session. Get the job done.
I don't mean to pass the buck here. I am on the budget committee, and we've always gotten at least through the first part done as quickly as possible. If you will look, the House has always passed a full budget, or last year we passed a full budget well in time. The Senate has not even passed a negotiating position. And in part that is because the Senate is spending a great deal of time just on confirmations. And part of that is, I mean, partisan, but part of it is one party is going very slow. This party is slow on confirmations. And you've got to get these confirmations done for the administration to operate. So at least they tell us that's one of the reasons why things are moving so slowly over there. But it is frustrating when the House, and I'm sure we'll do it again this time, I'd be surprised if we don't pass a House version of the budget by July 31st. And I will be surprised if the Senate passes, I know they're just not going to pass their version of the budget. They will begin negotiating without even a Senate negotiating position. And that's where we stand. But like I said, I'll use my position on the budget committee to make sure that we pass something on the floor of the House, presumably by the end of May.
Dan Weaverding.
Well, you know what? Let's, well, taxes. Whatever happened with flat tax? I mean, you say everybody wants to keep this and keep that, and everybody's all concerned about losing whatever. Wouldn't it be, I know that there's no simple answer, but it seems like such an easy fix, a flat tax. Everybody pays the same percentage regardless of what they're making. Doesn't that seem like that would be a possibility? Will that ever become a possibility?
Well, this was the biggest tax change since the late 1980s. So that tells you how long Congress goes between wholesale changes. They make little tinkering changes every year, but wholesale changes. In something, like I said, I'm not thrilled about, they raised the zero bracket amount in this budget. And I think to have a flat tax that would therefore inevitably mean an increase. A lot of people aren't paying any tax at all right now. It surprises me the degree to which people fight to keep every line in the budget right now. I've said in some meetings, that was a disappointing thing. It's hard to get to 218 congressmen. And like I said, we didn't get one Democrat to vote for this, and we had several Republicans not vote for it. So I think at the end we had like 226 out of 218, and that was the big Republican majority. So, and on the Senate, they just barely got it through, right? I mean, it was 51-49, and that was with this position. And right until the end, individual senators, they had so much power in the Senate, of course, because almost every one person can scotch the deal. Individual senators were keeping lines in the budget, and we had no choice but to go along with what they wanted, or the whole thing would collapse. So, a difficult thing, it's something people talked about this time, and you can see why they didn't make it this time, but hopefully, there are things I didn't like about this deal. Hopefully, it'll be more than, whatever, 30 years before we do this again.
Michelle Lee. like.
Glenn, thank you for coming. I guess my question is like an onion layer, but we all have talked about and listened to people concerned about the horrible shootings that are going on and the value of life that happens. I just came home this past weekend from a nephew who took his own life, and losing that life is also very horrific. And yet, for years and years, we sanctioned the taking of the life of the unborn. That is just as horrific. And yet, I remember going to listening sessions when Senator Feingold was in office and asking him about protecting life. And we ask people like you who tell us that they value life, and I've appreciated your position, but nothing seems to be changing with defunding Planned Parenthood, and I wondered if you could talk about that.
Okay, and something that wasn't publicized as much, but should have been publicized. We did use our one chance a year to change the laws to try to defund Planned Parenthood in the same bill that we allowed the Senate to redo Obamacare. And something, I don't know if it was had or whether the leadership knew this was going to happen all along. As far as our ability to do something with 51 votes in the Senate, they can only do certain things. And a parliamentarian who is kind of a bureaucrat who works in the Senate decides what things they can do with 51 votes and what things they cannot do. Decided to pull out that provision and said we could not defund Planned Parenthood specifically with 51 votes in the Senate. I think I see a way we can take a lot of their money in the future, but it's going to be an uphill climb. If they have a parliamentarian who won't let us do that with 51 votes, I think the bulk of money that flows to Planned Parenthood is through Medicaid. And I think Planned Parenthood gets a lot of money from the pill and sale of the pill. And I think if you got rid of those programs or restricted those programs, it would squeeze them to a certain degree. I also think over time, individual states have passed laws that have been struck down in the past and should not have been struck down by the Supreme Court. But I think as hopefully the Supreme Court changes, more of those laws are going to be upheld. Because of course, as you know, as much as anyone in the room, abortion was illegal in this country until 1973, almost back to its founding, and nobody ever thought that was a right that was in the Constitution. I'll also like to thank you, all you do, because ultimately in our country, as I think I mentioned to somebody over here on the sanctuary cities, what becomes of this country is going to be kind of what the people want, or to a degree to what they want. And right now, too many people are not thinking clearly on that issue. And as more and more people get on the right side, I think we'll get more and more judges to do the right thing, more and more state legislators to do the right thing, and maybe get the Congress to do the right thing. But at least I was under the impression when I voted for what they call the reconciliation instructions, this would have been in, I think, early 2017. I was voting to defund Planned Parenthood. And it was a disappointment and not that well publicized that the reason that that was not done is, in essence, a bureaucrat in the U.S. Senate said that that is not something that we could do with 51 votes in the U.S. Senate. That's what happened.
Rodney Scheibel. Alan Knoll.
My question is, can there be something done in the legislature when we have juvenile offenders, then records of their misbehaviors is kind of sealed. Once they reach that magic age of 18 and they become an adult, those records are automatically public records, which then I feel would expose some of this, and this Mr. Cruz probably wouldn't have been in the situation he was, but now you told me more stories of what the school district did, and that didn't help it.
Right, the problem is he didn't even have a record.
Right, that's what I understand.
And there's this ridiculous idea that's creeping all across the country, and it's unfortunate we have so many people in the prison system. But the way to solve the problem is just not to charge people with crimes. And there are a lot of my colleagues in Congress, I sit on a committee, I mean, that's the way the thinking is going, and the way to prevent crime is not to say we're not going to charge people with prison. I think right now there was a bill, I don't know what you can really after I left, but allowing people, or at least law enforcement, more access to juvenile records, I believe. I would think that's passed by now.
Cheryl Stauerwald? No. Sharon,
Dorian Aaron's?
what?
Dorian Aaron's?
Mary, maybe.
Sure. Mine's more of a statement on the deficit. I was sitting thinking one time our deficit is $20 trillion. And I went and figured out how big that is, and I went to Random Lake High School, and you verified my number. A $1 bill is 6.14 inches. You multiply that times 20 trillion, excuse me, comes out to 1,938,131,313 miles. Now, light goes 186,000 miles a second. It goes around the Earth in 7.5 times. That comes out to 669,600,000 miles per hour. So if you stretch these out almost 2 billion miles, and you turn the light on one end, it'll take 2.89 hours to get to the other end. And you can watch almost old Packarding before the light gets on. You know, if that isn't enough to really sit there and think, you gotta cut this baby down. What is the $1 trillion number where we're bankrupt?
Well, you're talking right now, we're at about $60,000 per person in this country.
Well, yeah, but I don't make sense.
I mean, I think one of my biggest disappointments in Washington is the degree to which people, including Republicans, want to spend more money in the federal government's business. It's a very frustrating thing. I think Donald Trump has the personality, obviously he doesn't now, but he's got the personality to crack the whip and straighten this stuff out. And we actually, under a deal called sequestration, we're actually cutting discretionary spending, which is only like 30% of our budget, for like 6 or 7 years in a row. So under a budget deal is not an impossible thing to do, but I think it'll create right now a strong personality to start things down that path.
Yes, sir, it'll shape.
I mean, it's just, I'll give you an example. I'm on the education committee, and there's a thing called Pell Grants, where they give grants to people who don't have as much money. And as part of this higher education bill, there are people who want to increase the amount of Pell Grants. Now we're broke, I mean, increase the size per grant. And we are broke. And I tried to get that thing out of there, and I was told by our chair that this is only Republicans we expect to vote for. The Republicans didn't have the votes to get a change of the higher ed committee out of committee without increasing the maximum Pell Grant. And that's just one number. I mean, my goodness, I think we have a majority of that committee, something like, what is it, maybe 22 to 17? So you can't even get the Republicans to look at higher ed without increasing the maximum Pell Grant. And eventually they did increase the maximum Pell Grant as much as many other ridiculous things in this omnibus that they passed. But the degree that even Republicans look at these things and say, I can't vote for this without an increase, is just ridiculous. Part of it is, I think the majority of people who meet with me in Washington want more money. Much more than when I was in the state legislature. I mean, again and again, people come through and they want money for this, and they want money for that. And part of it is the people have to, I say, you know, look, we got 21 trillion in debt, we expect to get money for it. But I think we have too many Americans collectively too, who are just always looking to the government for more.
Yes, sir, but remember is that when we get to be like Venezuela, we're kaput. I mean, there's gotta be a total.
We're headed there.
Yes, sir.
And I will point out, when you talk about this omnibus bill, that's only the 30% of the budget that's discretionary. 70% of the budget is mandatory. We're marching ahead with whatever Congress does, unless we do something to stop it. And by the way, that's the part that most of that federal money comes out of. That's 70% that chugs along automatically, whether we vote for something.
I'm gonna try again. Sharon Strenio?
Is it Struve?
Maybe Struve?
You're Sharon.
That brings it us.
I'm leading though, one from the other. Okay, I got a daughter and a son-in-law that both work for the post office, and they've gotten notice from their union that you're gonna get them to pay more for their insurance. They're paying for part of it already, but a lot more. Okay, they're supposed to pay more for their insurance, but yet you get free insurance. That's not right. That's number one. The next thing is they want to know how much and why they're going after them when we've got a president that travels every weekend to his golf outings and wants a parade, and then these people are supposed to pay because they're working people. I wouldn't want their jobs, being out in the cold and the hot and everything else, and in the working plants. They work hard for their money, and now they're supposed to pay more for their insurance that they already are already. How can we stop the bleeding somewhere else?
Well, as you know, we are, I mean, to a certain extent, because they gotta pay money to catch up on past losses. But taking into that account, we are right now losing money on the post office. I will look into, because I honestly don't know, exactly how they are changing the health benefit on people who work for the post office. I can tell you our insurance, we could say is too generous. I pay about $500 a month for a $5,000 deductible plan. That's what my plan is. And that's also the plan that my staff has. And I have not sometimes been able to get staff that I wanted because the plan's more generous on the state level than on the federal level. But I will look into, so I can familiarize myself how they are changing the health insurance benefit for post employees.
Does Congress have any ability to stop this stupid parade he wants? This military parade?
Well, I think we have had, if he does go ahead with the parade, I think having parades is something the military has done forever.
They never put one on for the president like that.
Well,
can you imagine the money that's gonna cost? That's gonna be millions. You gotta travel these people in and march down Pennsylvania Avenue just for him? I'm sorry, but I told somebody else earlier, this president, I didn't vote for him, but it was like I walked into the voting thing and threw a quarter up, who am I gonna vote for? Because neither one of them were worthy of my vote. Neither one. And now I'm embarrassed by our president. I'm sorry. And I think there's a lot of people that feel the same way.
Well, I think he tweets too much. I think he tweets too much. I've had one conversation with him since he was elected.
Oh, yeah.
I told him he tweets too much.
He runs it like,
he's doing a lot of good things too. You gotta remember he's doing a lot of good things. He's got a good cabinet. He's got a very good cabinet.
oh, come on, he's changing his cabinet every 5 minutes. And you said, you know, they gotta get, the Senate's gotta get voting on the approval of the cabinet. Well, when he's got somebody and 5 minutes later, when they disagree with him, he's gone. No.
Next question.
Yeah. Tom Richardson?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about, this gun issue again. I know you're tired of talking about it, but, one of the things that they keep coming up with is hardening schools. I'm a retired educator, and I can't imagine myself packing heat in my classroom and then going out of the hallway and confronting some clown with a high-powered rifle. It just doesn't make sense. Can we stop that kind of discussion real fast?
I don't think we're gonna have requirements anywhere.
Well, I would hope not, because it's a sure way for me to die. One way or the other, I'm dead.
As far as other things that are going on, as far as individual schools are concerned, like I said, I think we're gonna change the law and give more flexibility for school districts, but I think a lot of this is gonna have to be done on a school district by school district basis. What you think you're gonna have to do to keep a school safe in Milwaukee is gonna be different than what you have to do to keep Plymouth safe.
I'm a gun owner. I have tons of guns. I hunt, I do things, and I'm not anti-gun, but I really think that something straightforward like expanding the background checks to gun shows, for example. What's the harm in that? Well, I don't even care if they raise the gun age or whatever, but I just think having a reasonable way to control purchase, that's all.
The vast majority of people in gun shows are subject to background checks.
Right, because they're
dealers.
They're buying it from dealers. Right.
So most are, and really, well, we can pass more laws. If you talk to the police in Milwaukee, where there are so many felons with guns, you'll find somebody to get you a gun. Straw purchasers, have your girlfriend buy you a gun, whatever. It's just so common. And I don't really know what you can do to prevent that sort of thing from happening, other than putting, say, a draconian penalty on the girlfriend. I guess I would say, as you know, you've got tons of guns, and there are a lot of guns in our society, and people who are going to commit crimes, if they're willing to commit a crime and shoot somebody or rob somebody, they're certainly going to be willing to buy a gun from somebody who they know.
Debbie Patel?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to a comment that I heard, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm going to ask for clarification. You talked about changes to Medicaid. Are you suggesting that Medicaid should be changed to not cover birth control?
When I was in the state legislature, we talked about birth control for young people that right now was being distributed without their parents' knowledge, and I didn't think that was right.
But are you talking about not okay, so
I don't think it's up for the government to provide birth control for a 15-year-old girl when her parents don't even know about it. That's the current law.
So for Medicaid, because now people get birth control through Medicaid, correct? So you would want to change the law with regard to minors, or you want to take away the funding for birth control generally?
We had a bill for minors in the state legislature.
But I'm talking about now when you're at the federal level and the Medicaid.
I don't think
provisions.
I don't plan on voting on something in the near future or far future getting rid of.
To change funding for birth control?
Right.
You don't plan on that?
No.
Okay.
Jim O'Reilly?
I didn't have a question, but I can come up with one now. You spoke earlier about these bills. Why there has to be so many pages to come up with an idea? It just seems to me.
Well, you're funding the whole
government.
government.
That same bill.
You're funding the whole government, so that's part of it. And part of it is, I will say, almost impossible to get a controversial bill through Congress by itself. The rules are very difficult in the Senate. So if you have a controversial bill, even a little bit of controversy, you're probably not going to get it through unless it's part of a bigger budget package, which I could say is not right, which I could say is frustrating, but that's the way it works.
Judy Hartman? Judy? Yeah.
Well, the only comment or question I have, it kind of goes along with what this lady said. I don't understand why anybody, any private citizen needs an automatic weapon. And I think that the ban on automatic weapons should be reinstated. And I'd like to know how you feel about that. And if you think that automatic weapons are good for private citizens to own, then please explain to me why, what they're good for, because I'm not a gun owner, and I can't understand why a private citizen needs a weapon that can kill, 17 people in 6 minutes or whatever it took that guy in Florida.
Well, I think what you're describing as automatic weapons, we've got another gun owner here, are relatively normal in our society. I mean...
But why? That's what I'm, and are you in favor of them? Do you think everybody should have an automatic weapon?
Well, I don't believe in machine guns or things that fire that rapidly, but I think as far as guns that you could fire again and again, I think when you talk about the Second Amendment, or when you're talking about guns in America today, that's what you're talking about. They're just very common. I think if you ask people around you, do you live here in town, or?
I live in Plymouth.
Okay. I think if you ask gun people, I think most gun people have guns like that, or at least it's not uncommon.
But you don't shoot deer with guns like that, do you?
Yes.
Semi-automatics is what you use. Yeah. That's what's legal. Semi-automatics, not fully automatic. There's a difference.
Most of the gentlemen there. Guns, she refers more accurately to semi-automatics, right, are par for the course for deer hunting. It's not unusual at all. I mean, if you ask around, you will find that is normal.
Well, because my thinking is if the ban on automatic weapons were reinstated, then if only the police and the military had those types of weapons, then you would, if you saw a person walking down the street with that kind of a rifle, you'd know that they were illegal, that they were a criminal, or that they were up to no good.
Well, I think if you look, I take it you have no guns in your house, you should.
No, I'm not a gun owner.
You should ask, I'm sure you must know people who are deer hunting or people who have guns, do you?
Well, the hunters that I know use rifles.
Right. But they're what we would call
But I don't
semi-automatic.
think they have a magazine on that fires 20 or 30.
When they talked about the gun ban in the 1990s, there was a gun ban, and that ban was based more on how a gun looks than on what a gun does.
So you think it's okay for,
Right.
and you would probably not vote to ban it?
Not semi-automatics, no, because that's too, that is a basic gun that gun owners own in America.
But the assault, it was an assault weapon ban is what was allowed
I think there's a lot of confusion about what kind of guns are what guns. Automatic guns are banned, semi-automatic guns are not banned. So I think everyone could probably use a little research on that because I think it's very confusing to everyone. But on that was our last question, so we'll end with that. And then if anyone would like to talk to Congressman Grothman or Senator Strobel, please feel free. We have a little time before we have to go to our next one.
Just to be clear, assault weapons are in a class by themselves. They fire the 223 round, which is designed by and for the military.
You don't use an assault weapon.
No, but a semi.
Yeah, but
What did she say?
I think assault weapon is